Welcome, everybody. This is our 205th episode of the Minnesota Outdoor Skills and Stewardship Series. My name is Benji Cohn. Welcome you on a warm summer Minnesota spring day. It's getting into fishing season, and we have one of our DNR area fisheries supervisors, right, Scott, coming to talk about fishing the boundary waters, a place that both of us love to go. And Scott is way more successful fishing up there, so we'll turn this over to you and let you talk about catching fish up in the boundary waters. So.
All right, you bet. Yeah, thanks everybody for tuning in. Just a final check, Benji. Screen is up and you've got slides.
Yep, looks good.
Fantastic. Yeah, we'll talk about canoe fishing in the boundary waters, canoe area wilderness today. Got a lot of content that's very angling focused to get through, and then we'll try to save some time at the end for questions and answers. So a little bit of the layout here today. We're going to talk about what and where is the boundary waters canoe area wilderness, when to go, where to go, what to bring, with most of that emphasis being on the fishing side of things. And then we're going to break down 4 game fish species that are most popular with our visitors to the boundary waters canoe area. Those are northern pike, smallmouth bass, lake trout, and walleye. We'll also talk about some other fish opportunities, give some general angling tips: hard won, hard fought, hard learned, bag borrowed and stolen. And then yeah, we'll close with some questions and answers and try to leave some time for that as well. So the what and where portion, this is a good opportunity to show you all of that. Boundary waters canoe area wilderness, Minnesota-Ontario border. It's pretty big in size, 1.1 million acres. And you know, we really have to recognize those that came before us that set this beautiful area aside as a wilderness area. You know, had to kind of fight and claw through legislation and you know, all the bureaucracy and all that comes with establishing a wilderness area. But basically the 1964 Wilderness Act established it, and then the 1978 Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness Act. So beautiful chunk of land. And what is most important, why does it function so well for canoe travel? It's some of the densest concentration of lakes in the world, and there's fantastic interconnectivity with those lakes. So you can move from lake to lake to check out all of this. Depending on where you go, some would argue it's heavily visited, others would say lightly visited, but we get about, per data that's shared by the Forest Service, 150,000 annual visitors. That's about 10 times as many as go into Quetico Provincial Park, kind of the mirror image wilderness area on the Ontario side. And then it's administered by the U.S. Forest Service. So today we're talking, I'm an employee of the Department of Natural Resources, talking about angling opportunities in the boundary waters, but all of the administration is overseen by the United States Forest Service. And just know that this area is a wilderness area and it has a limited entry system. That's pretty darn important. We'll talk about that. So how are you going to get into the boundary waters? Well, that is where something very important comes up. You need to have a permit. We have a limited entry system, and you need to go on to recreation.gov and find open permits. And that permitting opens up in late January. It's first come, first serve, but they're usually available permits for different locations. Just make sure that you create an account, log on, and secure a permit for your dates and locations that you want to enter the boundary waters from. So when should you go? Well, I can tell you, being a 4-season visitor to the boundary waters, you can totally make the case for the shoulder seasons. Amazing fishing opportunities in the spring and in the fall. Those shoulder seasons can be pretty amazing. We're just coming out of and finishing up the winter season up there as lakes will start opening here next month and into May. But for the focus of this talk, we're going to talk about the summer season, which is when most of those visitors are coming up to the boundary waters. So let's talk a little bit about when to go in the summer, with our focus being on angling. If it's early summer, and I'll put that period kind of late May to late June, what are the advantages there? Well, from, you know, this is the fisheries management side. New forage isn't ready. In other words, the bait fish has just recently hatched out. They're very small in size, and most of those fish that you're searching for, that you're fishing for, can't rely on this year's forage yet. So the bite ends up being pretty good early in the year. Plus those fish are still up shallow because the water temperatures are still cool. They're in that really comfortable range for most of those fish. And when it's early in the season, you don't have as many people out there as will come later in the season. Some of the cons, you can still have very cold nights. In fact, I've had some nights out there in that early summer period that are below freezing. You can have mosquitoes and black flies of biblical proportions, but you kind of have to take the bad with the good. If you come in the midsummer period, and I'll say that's roughly late June to the end of July, some of the pros from an angling perspective, well, you've got that submerged vegetation up and at them, right? Everything's topped out, leafed out, and there's some excellent plant beds that you can fish that will hold fish. And generally speaking, the days and the nights are much warmer. You're going to be a lot more comfortable up there. Some of the cons, well, those fish have started to move offshore. They're a little harder to find. You just got to put your time in and think about where you're looking. And as I mentioned earlier, you're going to run into more people. So if you like getting away from everyone, you know, smack dab during the holiday around 4th of July or middle of summer, you'll run into more people. If we transition to late summer, we've got comfortable weather, although the nights do start cooling off. And I'll say this period's kind of late July to mid-September. The other thing that comes up is, once again, you're dealing with insects on the negative side of things, right? Stable flies and horse flies take a big chunk out of your flesh, painful bites, and it can be harder to find bait. And what that may mean, we'll talk about as we explore bait options for those that want to bring bait options into the boundary waters. But overall, the message I hope that you'll leave here with as you weigh things out is, when should you go? Well, you should go when you can. I've said this a number of times when we talk to anglers about when they should go fishing, because at the end of the day, we could all get hit by a bus tomorrow and it could all be over. So you should go fishing whenever you can. That's my best advice. All right, where to go? Well, we want to put some time into scouting this. Maybe you're a seasoned Boundary Waters pro and you're just looking for new places to explore, new entry points. Maybe it's your first trip ever, but you want to go because you've heard about the excellent fishing. Let's head over to the Lake Finder on mndnr.gov at the DNR's website and check it out. Lake Finder is super useful. You can look up some of the names of the lakes within the Boundary Waters Canoe area. If you're on recreation.gov, you can see where those entry points are, can check out a map, and you can search those lakes. And even you can use that recreational compass feature, and you can pan around, taking a look at the map, clicking on the lakes, and then clicking on the links for Lake Finder and seeing what is out there. One caveat I do want to tell you, though, is these are wilderness lakes. They are visited quite infrequently. We have 3 offices in northeastern Minnesota that oversee portions of the Boundary Waters. They are, you know, talking about DNR offices. They are the Grand Marais, Finland, and Tower offices. Maybe even maybe, I don't think maybe there's a small chunk of International Falls, but those offices, you know, aren't visiting the thousands of lakes that are in the Boundary Waters. They're picking the most prolific or the most heavily visited and the largest, or maybe places where they have fish management ongoing, and then they infrequently visit the others just because it's a huge resource that changes over time. So just know the caveats of those lake surveys are that some of that data starts to get dated. You might see surveys from the 70s, 80s, or 90s. Think of it as a snapshot, a general idea, you know, what species are there. You know, maybe it gives you a sign of abundance, but those size and abundance numbers can change over time, just like they can on all our lakes in Minnesota. You can also turn to references on where you should go fishing. A couple of really good ones: Boundary Waters and Quetico Fishing Guide by Michael Furtmans. Michael spent a lot of time in the Boundary Waters, worked in the Boundary Waters, fishes in the Boundary Waters, and still makes his home on the outskirts of the Boundary Waters. So an excellent resource for folks that want to learn about some of those lakes and fishing opportunities. And then another person that lives close to the Boundary Waters up in the Ely area, we want to tip my hat to Stu Osthoff, who edits the Boundary Waters Journal. You can get your hands on back issues that have lots of information about lakes that you can visit, about fishing trip reports, just places to highlight, campsite reviews, that sort of thing. Really good information inside those pages. So a couple of good print references for you to use. If you want to go the online version, there's a few ways you can do it. One is BWCA.com. There's some great trip reports out there. There's a whole fishing forum page. You can learn a little bit about what fishing prospects are and glean a little bit of information there. You can head to Reddit. Reddit has a BWCA page that includes, on occasion, some trip reports or, a forum by which people can ask questions about fishing opportunities in the boundary waters. And then finally, there's some great information on YouTube's a picture's worth 1,000 words. A video must be worth 1,000,000. You can search for entry points for specific lakes and get kind of an idea of what does it look like, what kind of habitat might be out there, maybe even glean a little bit of information about what the fishing is like. What should we bring on our Boundary Waters fishing trip? Well, we should definitely bring a permit. We talked about that. You need to secure that permit and bring it with you, have it on you and your party. You need to have a canoe with current registration, make sure that watercraft is licensed. It could be your own canoe. You could rent one through an outfitter. Make sure you've got paddles. Bring your fishing license. If you plan to target lake trout, make sure you have a trout stamp. And then make sure that we're safe, that we're packing a personal flotation device. Beyond that, there's lots of other safety measures, map, compass, GPS. And then you really just need minimalist camping gear, things like stoves, packs, sleeping bag and pad, your tents, hammocks, bear-proof or hung food packs, saws, hatchets, pots and pans, plates, water filter, sporks, food, all that miscellaneous gear. To be honest, that's not an exhaustive list. I could go on and on about the things that you would bring into the boundary waters, but you can find those complete lists elsewhere. There's lots of great BWCA pack lists, and that's a source of continuous debate is what is the right things to bring in for minimalist wilderness visitors. But from a fishing perspective, we have to have some pretty specialized gear with a fishing focus. So let's talk a little bit about what you can bring. And this is just my opinion, what I like to do. Hopefully you can glean something from that. But let's start by talking about reels and line, right? Like to pack in either spinning or casting gear. I like to throw on monofilament 6 or 8 pound test. It's kind of a do everything kind of pound test or line style. You can put that on. I like the mono on my spinning. I like to have braid on bait casters. If you have one of those reels and you want to plan to fish for lake trout, make sure that you're packing a line counter. You don't have to have it, I suppose, but it is a nice accessory to bring along. And then bring a spool of fluorocarbon for leaders. Again, and that depending on what fish you're targeting. If it's a great big pike, you want something heavier, but kind of a do everything bass, walleye, pike is a good, 8 pound test. And fluorocarbon has this unique property where when you put it into water, it becomes polarized. It's very hard for fish to be able to see it. So fluorocarbon makes a really snappy leader, particularly when we're talking about lakes in the boundary waters that have some of the greatest water transparency in our entire state. Rods, you got to bring those fishing rods, and I would advise you bring anywhere from 1 to 3. Yeah, I'm probably an overpacker. There's folks that would probably recommend you take a travel rod if fishing isn't the focus of your trip, but for me, fishing is why I'm in the boundary waters. It's got exceptional fishing. I want to make sure I'm packing at least a medium rod to start, and then I'll throw a rod on either power size gradient from there. I'll go down to a medium light to finesse fish like walleye and bass, and I'll go to a medium heavy to power rod to be able to take on northern pike and lake trout, larger sized fish. And certainly thinking about the action or the taper and the bend in the rod, you can really pay attention to that too. If you're going to do a lot of trolling and you're running a lure that needs to have some give and some sponge, some spring to it to not only be able to catch that fish and not rip the lure out of the fish's mouth, but just to hold on, make sure that's a consideration as well. You might want to have a medium action that tapers halfway through the rod bend if you're going to do some trolling, or maybe you want a fast action if you want an immediate response, if you're going to touch jigs along the bottom and feel that delicate touch of rocks or bites. I prefer a 2-piece rod for convenience of packing into the canoe, but if you do go with a 1-piece, just put them in a rod sleeve, folks. Those rod slicks are really inexpensive. They're going to protect those rods. If you're throwing a pack against a rod, that's a great way to break a guide off. And then make sure you're using bungee lashes. So if we're portaging a canoe, it's a great way for us to bungee in our oars, or paddles, and bungee in our fishing rods and just get them protected for travel. And if you really want to have some fun, throw in a 4-piece fly rod. Those, I say 4-piece because they pack down to these little tiny tubes. You could pack along a 6 or an 8 weight, and you can have a ton of fun throwing streamers or throwing poppers, topwater baits. You can catch a lot of fish in the boundary waters on fly gear and have a blast doing it. So that's kind of our fun fishing, is to throw one of those in. I mentioned I was going to touch on bait, and so right out of the gate, I can tell you that leeches travel best. This is a bait item that you can take the water away. You can pack them in oxygen as long as you keep them a little bit wet so they don't dry out. And when we're going through a portage, we can dump out that water, carry them through the portage, sink them on the other side, fill them back up with water. They just travel really well. They're super handy and they catch everything. You can also use minnows as a bait option. If you pack a seine, and there are seines, they're legal to use, the width of which is guided in the regulation synopsis. You can look that up for collecting your own bait, but you can pack, they're very lightweight, you can pack one of these hip height seines, and you and a partner can go in and seine a shoreline and catch your own bait to use. But typically, you know, you're going to stick those inside of a canister, like a leech locker or a small receptacle. An Nalgene works just fine. But typically, without aeration, those minnows are going to die pretty quickly. But they'll still work just fine. It looks like a fish. It smells like a fish. It'll do very well. So, you know, whether it's minnows or leeches, think about how you want to keep those. A leech locker works well for traveling, or a leech bag. I've even taken these little Kool-Aid canisters that have the screw top, perforated the top, put a little rope string on it, and you can dunk that in and out and quickly be able to get your bait in and out of the water. So work smarter, not harder. And then, you know, there's quite a list of terminal tackle that you can bring along as well. A little bit goes a long ways. Remember, everything you're bringing in is coming on your back. You're packing it in, so travel lightly. But an assortment of jigs and hooks, some floating jig heads, some line to create those leaders, some that we talked about already, that line, beads, spinners and clevises. We're going to want to bring some different weights along, slip weights, split shot weights, keeled trolling weights. We're going to want to bring some different swivels along, barrel, snap, and 3-way swivels, and then bring some slip floats. And with those, try to get light up slip floats, the ones that you can either slip a light into or that are able to hit the water and just know they need to light up, because there's nothing more fun than finding a school of fish, being able to throw a bobber on top of them, light it up at night or at sunset. I have a lot of fun with slip floats. You know, continuing, if we're looking at lures, we want to visit with a small assortment of different lures will go a long way. Some crank baits or stick baits, right, with various running depths. They could be, you know, have little tiny lips on them or great big lips, and the angle of the lip and the length of the lip really determines how deep it will run. But something that runs anywhere from 5 feet down to 25 feet. We can run some top water plugs, right? That's really great for that smallmouth bass bite, where you can have a lot of fun watching them come up and smash and explode at the top of the water. You know, whether it's poppers or you know, prop baits or all kinds of different top water options. Make sure you bring some casting and trolling spoons. Casting spoons are these big heavy ones that we can lob out there, let them drop to a certain depth and reel back in. The trolling spoons are usually lighter, and they'll just kind of go down and hang behind a leader, behind a trolling weight, and don't take a lot of speed to be able to have a nice wobble to them. So an assortment of those. And then bring along some plastics. If you manage to lose your bait, kill your bait, or even if you don't want to travel with bait, plastic grubs. A jig and grub catches all kinds of fish. Plastic, whether it's club tail or scissor tail, plastic minnows. Stick baits, things like Senkos that you can finesse fish in shallow water, or even plastic crayfish. Crayfish are very, you know, widespread because of the rocky surfaces and substrates that are found in boundary waters, lakes. A lot of crayfish up there, a lot of fish that feed on crayfish. So bring along some plastics. What else do we need to bring that's specific for fishing? Well, if you're going to fish for lake trout, make sure you have some sort of depth assistance. There are a few different options for getting your bait down. So you could have lead core lines on a reel that you pack in. You could bring a jet diver, or a contraption that's going to send your baits down. You could use a mini dipsy diver or a diver disc. They make little tiny ones that work great out of a canoe. You could bring those keel-shaped trolling weights. I mentioned some of those. There's other trolling weights available as well, or those long lip banana baits, things like reef runners that will really get down 25, 30 feet of water, Magnum, Rapala tail dancers, any of those banana baits work well. You just got to make sure you're able to get down at depth, because when we're talking about lake trout, this is a fish that will be in these deep, clear, cold Canadian Shield lakes, and they are able to move up and down the water column very quickly as they chase after ciscos, their native prey, and they have a physostomus gas bladder that lets them go up and down the water column quickly. So if you can get a bait down to them, they're really careful about where they're going to be during the summer months, and they're going to start moving deeper as they go. As the summer goes along, because again, our lakes are going to set up and stratify. What that basically means is, as the summer goes on, water's going to warm up. That top layer, the epilimnion, is going to get warm. It's going to have the most oxygen in it. That middle layer, the metalimnion or the thermocline, is where it rapidly changes from hot to cold, and the oxygen starts to slip eventually out of there. And then the hypolimnion is that lower layer that usually has the least amount of oxygen, and there aren't typically a lot of fish found in that real deep area. But those lake trout, they want enough oxygen and they want really cold water, so they're going to be down at depth. You might be 20 or 30 foot down in the early summer, and by midsummer it could be 40, 50. But it's also a fish that moves up rapidly. So if you can put the bait close enough to them, they'll usually find it and strike it hard. All right, so having said that, knowing that we want to get our baits down to a certain depth, it's nice to know what depths we are in. So how are we going to be able to do that? Well, you can do it a few different ways. One, I advocate, because I'm a fishing diehard, bring in some sort of depth finder if you're serious about your fishing in the boundary waters. It's critical because there's very little depth information on lakes in the boundary waters. You might find some very basic depth data on the DNR's webpage and on the Lake Finder link, and some of those maps that were done with planimeter depth, that, dropping the old rock on a string and trying to put it all together. Or you may find very little at all, because again, this is a wilderness area. There's not commercial, depth finding going on out there. So there's very little depth information that's out there. But if you are bringing along your own depth finder, it's important to do it, and just make sure you're bringing a suction cup transducer mount. That's going to stick to the side of your canoe. Most of these depth finders that are sold are intended to be mounted permanently with screws into the side of the back of your boat, your fishing boat. Well, we don't want to do that to our canoe, right? We want to have portability. So buy that suction cup transducer mount and attach your transducer accordingly. You can also bring along a flasher with a lithium battery. I did this for a number of years. If you can read a flasher, which is a dial-based depth finder, that you read it on a circular dial, and you learn to interpret the depths based off of the settings on your machine. That's going to work just fine for getting you depth. Hook it up with a lithium battery, just because, hey, those lithium batteries are half the weight of sealed lead acid batteries, and they pack quite a punch. Just like our technology has increased in electronics, so has the technology with lithium batteries. Look for a portable depth finder unit. I'm hauling in a Hummingbird just because I have the ability to create my own bathymetric maps as I go, and mark my favorite spots on a lake, so I have chart capabilities as well as depths. If you have no electronics, you're not out of luck. Just learn to read the shoreline. This is a pretty generic but accurate way of doing it. Look at the shoreline. The shoreline is going to tell you a lot about what sort of depth you have close to shore. If you've got a very steep cliff face, it's probably going to be a fast dropping, very deep break off. If you've got gentle sloping, nice relief that's happening very gradually, you're going to have probably a nice relief that follows into the water. Not always the case, but that's a general idea that you can follow. So if you can read the shoreline, it's going to tell you what your depths are doing. The other thing you can do is really, just pay attention, because we have such exceptional water clarity. Many times with the naked eye or while using polarized sunglasses, you're able to actually see depth. And once it disappears, you kind of know, well, that looks like it's about 10 foot. A little bit deeper is 15, and I lose the bottom after about 20 feet. So you can kind of give you an idea, at least be in the ballpark of what sort of depths you're in. Other things, clothing ends up being an item of focus, right? Sun protection factor clothing is important, just because if you're going to be in a canoe all day trying to catch dinner and have some fun, you'll be exposed to the sunlight quite a bit. Make sure you're bringing bug-proof clothing, right? There's a lot of insects to deal with in the boundary waters. We're not talking about being in the 7-county metro area and metro mosquito control, keeping things tolerable. This is a wild area. There's lots of bugs, and guess what? The bugs are there to be food for all of our fish, so it's not necessarily a bad thing. Come up there with permethrin-treated clothing, maybe bring a full-body bug mesh suit. At a very minimum, bring a head net, because you're going to go through a portage that's going to be full of mosquitoes. They are notoriously places that biting insects like to hang out at, so make sure you've got a head net handy when you're visiting portage areas to move between lakes. Make sure you're bringing high quality, breathable, packable rain gear. It's just going to make you that much more comfortable having something that's breathable. You know, we can't control the weather. You're gonna get a weather forecast as you go in, and that's a good tip is, you know, print off the weather forecast before you go in, bring it with you, print it out on paper. You know, make sure you're packing that rain gear every day. The day that you don't pack it, that's when a rain shower is gonna come up. But make sure you have it with you at all times. So if you need it, you have it, because if you're serious about your fishing, you want to take good advantage of it. You're still going to be out there when it's raining. Obviously, get off the water if there's thunder and lightning. And then quick dry clothing, it's just really advantageous. This is the kind of stuff that you see, you hop in the water, you're wet, you get out 20, 30 minutes later, it's all dry again. Quick dry clothing makes those wet portages a lot easier to deal with, hopping in and out of the canoe. Other miscellaneous things that we need to, that I would strongly suggest you bring along. I talked about the polarized sunglasses, not only for seeing bottom and seeing what sort of structure is out there, but also literally you are sight fishing early in the year. You are spotting those fish. I've spotted pike, I've spotted bass, I've spotted walleye. You know, while using polarized sunglasses, you're going to see the fish, cast to the fish. That's the idea. Bring along those polarized sunglasses. Bring a thermocell. This is a butane operated insect repellent. You turn it on and it creates a nice little area around you that keeps the mosquitoes away. When we're fishing at power hour, we're back in camp, keeps those mosquitoes and other bugs at bay. Bring up a fold-up telescoping landing net. These things are worth their weight in gold. You don't want to head out for the day and realize you forgot your net and you're fighting some giant fish and you don't have a way to land it and catch it. Fold up and telescoping just because it's going to save you space, and you know, bring as big of a net as you expect to catch for a fish and then go a little bit bigger. Having everything at the ready as an angler is really important. So we're really pulling this from the pages of our trout fishing friends, and that is wearing a vest or having a lanyard with all your tools on it. You want to have a hemostat or a pliers, a braid scissor, nail clipper, some kind of a hook out, or they call them toothpicks. Cold Snap Outdoors makes this little handy dandy toothpick that you can pop a hook out of a fish's mouth very easily with. Have all those tools at the ready. As I mentioned earlier, we want to sock or slick our rods so we don't break anything, but if you do, make sure you have extra rod tips, guides, and epoxy along. You guarantee somebody in camp isn't paying attention and they're going to step on one of your rods that they don't see leaning up against a bush, or it's going to be on a portage, it gets caught in a tree branch or something, but just be ready for that. Bring a headlamp. You need it in camp. You want it at dark when you're out fishing. And you know what? If you get a really nice headlamp and you turn it on and you're looking down in the water, you might just see some walleyes. You might just see some eyeballs reflecting back at you. That helps you find those fish. Bring along an anchor bag. You don't have to buy a fancy one. You're certainly not going to portage a giant 20-pound anchor into the boundary waters. Instead, go buy yourself a $5 basketball net and some paracord, and you're going to seal up the edges and make this nice retractable opening and closing bag that you can put rocks into. And the boundary waters is full of all kinds of rocks that make excellent anchors. You see in this photo right here, we've got a pool noodle that's used for protecting the gunnels. If you're that person in the front of the boat, if you're in the bow position, your legs start to really rub up on there. So make sure you're putting those in. Plus, they make a great place for you to hang your jigs or other tackle as you're switching lures. And you'll only go into the boundary waters once without some nice canoe chairbacks. Just having those being able to lean back on that canoe seat and having something that pushes back is going to be very nice for you. So make sure you're packing something along that will do that. And then make sure if you're in the back of the boat, you can put a rod holder in the front or in the back, but I think it's really nice for the steersmen because they're the power. They're the power, or excuse me, they're the steering. The bow person is usually the power, but when we're trolling around and fishing, I'm usually telling the person in the front, just fish. I'll take care of the steering and take care of the propulsion. So if I got my hands full, being able to operate from the back, I usually want to throw that rod into a holder while we're trolling along. Let's talk about some fish. Let's get some tips on those different species that we're going to be targeting. We'll start off with northern pike. You have an amazing opportunity in the boundary waters for northern pike. These fish are a cool water species, which really dictates where they're going to be found. You can generally troll in a lot of places and you can pick up lots and lots of hammer handle pike. That's because once those fish start to get more mature, they do move to deeper water. They do want to go to deeper and colder water. So start looking a little bit deeper as the year progresses, as the summer progresses, and they look for that cold water. They're a lie in wait ambush predator. So this is where you want to be looking around, paying attention, right? You see a down tree, you see a shady side on a boulder, you see a sheer rock wall where the afternoon shadows are cast really nicely. Those are places those pike want to hang out and wait for a bait option or your lure to come flying by. And as I mentioned earlier, they're going to move deeper as the shallows start to warm. So be thinking about finding them in deeper water. This is an amazing fishing opportunity within the boundary waters. This is where our state record northern pike was caught on Basswood Lake. Even our catch record was on Basswood as well, and that's partially inside the boundary waters. So tremendous angling opportunity because we're in the northeastern zone for pike management. 30 to 40 inch pike are protected up here. This is like the place to go for large northern pike. Canadian Shield waters that have Cisco, Tulibes as forage. We grow big pike up here, and we try to protect that opportunity by putting back those big fish, taking good care of them. So make sure you're geared up appropriately to do that. Make sure you're using a heavy leader. You can throw big baits if you want to target big pike, right? A northern pike is known to eat a prey item that's 1/3 to 1/2 its body size, so don't be afraid to go big. At the same time, you will incidentally catch these fish, and sometimes you will incidentally catch large fish. We just ask you to take good care of them. Try to keep them in the water, keep them in the landing net. Get out of the canoe if you need to land them, and just keep them wet, keep them in good shape. So if they're tired out, they're able to swim away, and we're not overhandling them. And then, make sure you're matching the gear to the fish. If we're going to show up to the boundary waters with a medium or a medium light rod, you don't want to be throwing great big heavy lures for them. Make sure you're going to have everything matched from your line weight to the reel to the rod to the lure. Everything's going to be in a nice balance to work together to match the gear to the fish that we're targeting, particularly with northern pike. Let's talk about smallmouth. This is kind of the everyman fish in the boundary waters, and we do get a lot of tourists that come up from out of state, particularly the Rust Belt states, that come up and love our smallmouth opportunities. They know we grow them big up in the North Country. This is a fish that will spawn in early summer after the season they're spawning when the season opens up. So they are out there, and they're very abundant in parts of the boundary waters. Just a note on the spawning, we get questions biologically as fish biologists. What about targeting fish on beds? Is that something that's problematic? The answer is it's actually not at a population level. There's lots of research that shows, yeah, they can be taken off nests, and nests can be lost to nest predators, but we really need very small numbers of nests for nest guarding fish like bass and sunfish to be successful in order to recruit year classes and continue to have that fishery available. So even if people want to go out and catch a meal, they're having a hard day, they're not finding many fish, and the end of the day comes, they happen to bump into a spawning smallmouth with a male guarding the nest. Honestly, we have plenty of them out there. There's plenty of fish out there. If you need that fish for the meal, go ahead and take it, because they're very abundant, and we only need a few nests to be successful, and we've got thousands of nests in most of these lakes. Lots of incidental catches, right? If you're out fishing for walleyes, if you're fishing for pike, if you're fishing for even sometimes when you're fishing lake trout, you'll incidentally catch these fish. So very widespread distribution, and in a portion of the boundary waters, this is an introduced species, not even native to portions of the boundary waters. So lots of them out there. They're great for kids. They're great for the frying pan. They're great for catching some of your personal bests, and they're a ton of fun on top water. Bring along a head and torpedo, a Rapala skitter pop, or a whopper plopper. They're so much fun to catch when they're blowing up on top waters at evening, early in the morning, early in the season when they're up shallow. You can power fish these, or you can finesse fish these. That means when I say power fish, like we're gonna, paddle, 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 and go as fast as we can along a shoreline and just cast, just beat the brush, beat the lake shore, just cover water and try to find those aggressive fish and power fish. Or you can finesse fish. You can move slowly. You can take plastics and other baits and drag them very slowly, or pop them intermittently across the bottom. See if we can pick those fish up by feel and finesse them. So you can really fish a lot of different ways for smallmouth. Now, why do they do so well? Well, because they're so rock oriented, right? We've got all this rock all over the boundary waters, so we've got tons of smallmouth there. So don't be afraid to hit some of those rock piles, particularly in the middle of the lake, and stuff that looks really good that's generally sloping off the shoreline. Let's talk about lake trout. I already mentioned you are going to need a trout stamp to be able to pursue these, but they are a treat. We've got 110 inland lakes in Minnesota that have lake trout. Many of them are in the boundary waters, so you are fishing some of the best lake trout water on the planet. Lake trout are found in deep, clear lakes. That's the only place they're found. They have very specific habitat requirements. As I mentioned earlier about needing that depth assistance on your lures, they are a pelagic fish, meaning they occupy open water in the middle of the lake, but they can move very quickly up and down the water column. We talked about them having that physostomus gas bladder and moving up and down and being able to burp off that air. You see that when you catch them. And they will start very shallow at ice out. Here in the next month or two, as the lakes open up in the boundary waters, you can catch them super shallow. Although they are closed up until fishing opener. They close at the end of March here, actually. But you'll find them shallow at ice out, and then they'll move deeper as the summer progresses and that lake stratifies. We talked a little bit about what that means for temperature and dissolved oxygen. You control baits around and cover water, usually a pretty wise strategy. Just cover water and try to have more encounters with the fish. Or if you find likely looking locations, you can jig, or on calm days in particular, you can jig, or you can drift in very light winds, just kind of moving that jig up and down in the open water area or bouncing it off of a reef top. And one nice little tip, we sometimes do this in my camp on lake trout water, you can take a dead bait, leave it on the bottom, open up the bail, and just sit there and camp. And if all of a sudden that line goes for a ride and it's starting to leave and go out into the lake, you probably have a lake trout that picked up that dead bait. Matter of fact, a great thing you can do is if you're cleaning fish and you look in the guts and you find a smaller fish that's been consumed that's in the stomach, stick it on the hook, lob it out there, got a nice dead bait that you can catch a lake trout on, even if it's partially digested. And so when we're fishing lake trout, let's spend some time marking and fishing those reefs. So if we've got a depth finder and we have that ability, that's going to help us zero in. The entire lake is a potential place to find lake trout, but if we can find these reefs, we can start to narrow down where we want to spend our time fishing. How about if we're targeting our state fish, everybody's favorite, walleye? What are we going to do? Well, they are a crepuscular fish. They're active at dawn and dusk. Those are great times to target walleye, is early and late in the day. They're very active in low light conditions. So if we've got a 4 or 5 day forecast for our trip and 2 of the days are sunny and 2 or 3 of the days are cloudy, let's make sure we're getting after those walleyes on the days that we've got a lot of cloud cover, or we see wind conditions look like they're going to kick up on a couple days. Let's make sure that we're taking advantage of those windy days. We want to make sure we're hitting the windward side of that structure. Call it like a food chain reaction, right? The wind is blowing over, and that's going to push up all this phytoplankton and zooplankton. The minnows are following that in, and then all of a sudden we've got walleyes following it in as well. So go to the windward side. Always go to where the wind is blowing into. That's pretty good tip. They're a structure-oriented fish by and large. You're going to find walleyes on reefs and points, islands, humps, down trees, and we want to find medium density aquatic plant stands. What does that mean? Well, if I find a plant here, a plant there, it's probably not going to be all that attractive to fish. Likewise, if we've got oodles of plants staring us in the face and it's super dense, it's probably not going to hold a lot of fish. So if you can find a medium density stands of aquatic plants, those are the money locations for finding walleyes and other game fish like pike and bass. And I mentioned earlier, if you got that headlamp, you can try that glowing eyeball check while you're out on the water. We can often find walleyes on substrate changes. So whether you're using a depth finder that's reading density, you got density readings based on color that's coming back on your depth finder on LCD display. We can pick up substrate changes there, or we can see them with our polarized glasses looking down, or oftentimes just by feel, dragging a bait over the bottom. We can feel if something changes, if it goes from sand to gravel or rock, for example. So we want to start shallow and move deeper. That's true of our daily pattern. They're going to start in low light conditions in shallow water and eventually move deeper as the day becomes brighter. And that's an annual pattern, right? They're going to start off in that summer period being in shallow water. As we get later in the year, they're going to move a little bit deeper as we go. Let's give you some other general angling tips as we're getting close to questions and answers here, guys. There are other species to target in the boundary waters, particularly on the western end. There's some great largemouth bass, black crappie, and bluegill fishing. On the eastern end, you got opportunities at lake whitefish and some stream trout fishing. If this is brand new water for you and you haven't fished it, something that's new, let's start off with search baits. That means we're gonna cast or troll around with things like jigs or drag those jigs around. We might troll a lure, we might take live bait and slip sinker rig our way along, but we're going to use these search baits to try to find active fish and put the pattern together. If we catch one at a specific depth or on a weed edge or on a piece of structure, it has to be a light bulb moment. Well, we're looking for something that looks similar. We're starting to put the pattern together. And I mentioned this one a little bit earlier. Always make sure you're fishing the windward side of shorelines, points, islands, all those locations, reef tops, whatever, where the wind is blowing, you will find fish. The other thing we will look for is fishing moving water. In the boundary waters, we do have a lot of rivers that connect lakes. We do have a lot of lakes that abut each other with short portages. And we have places that meet together and have neck downs that lead from one lake to another. And we do get movement through there. We absolutely get movement in these locations. They attract fish. The other thing to think about is the idea of a seiche on a lake. A seiche is the wind is blowing, and instead of having flat, calm, even water levels, it actually blows more water to the windward edge of the lake, and in doing so kind of creates this counter-current movements. So we do get moving water, and we want to pay attention to those to the windward side, downwind edge of lakes, and we also want to look for that moving water in neck down areas. A few more general tips. I've referenced power hour a few times, but think about that as a great fishing time of the day, sunrise and sunset. So if you got to set the alarm and get up early, get out there. If you got to cook your dinner after dark because you're going to hang around for the sunset bite, that's okay. It's well worth your time. Another kind of hard found tip that I like to employ is trying to use a kayak stringer. You see it in the photo here. You can also use the clip style stringers. That's going to individually allow you to keep fish on a stringer. You can string fish through their jaw, through piercing the connective tissue. What we don't want to have you do is run that stringer through their gills. That's going to kill those fish. If you are holding those fish for a short period of time, it's going to keep them fresher. And if you're below your possession limit, or your daily limit, which is the same as possession in Minnesota, if you're below that limit, you can call fish. So I'm deciding for my group today, I need 3 fish. I caught one that was kind of big. I didn't know if I was going to catch any others. You know what? That fish has only been on the stringer for about an hour, and I caught another one. I'm going to let that one go. You can do that so long as you're below your possession or daily limit. Other general tips, you can catch just about everything on a jig and a leech or a jig and a plastic grub. Again, we talked about those being great search lures. Try to find a lure that's kind of a do everything, or a bait that's a do everything. Just going to allow you to cover water and get out there. You don't have to bring bait into the boundary waters. I've caught plenty of fish on curly tails on plastic minnows, you can challenge yourself to do that. Or you can go into Quetico, where you're not allowed to bring organic bait in and do it all on artificials. So you don't have to have the bait. It is a nice option, but just try to find something that you're going to start off with that will catch a multitude of different fish. And bottom line, enjoy the chase, right? This is some of the best fishing on the planet. You can fish for your meal, so you're not worried about putting them in the freezer. We're not, putting them in the refrigerator. We're not trying to, feed grandpa and grandma. It's just whoever's in our group. It's the most relaxing way to go. Is all I have on the agenda is I'm fishing today, trying to catch enough for a meal or just for some photo fish or just to have some fun. Make sure you're fishing as a team. That's for your entire party that's on your permit. Work with everyone amongst your group to put the pattern together, and then work with your team within the canoe. Whoever's on the bow and the stern, you're working together to navigate, but also just to fish. Help put the pattern together, fish as a team. And you're going to experience fly-in caliber angling, right? If you were flying into Alaska or into Canada, that's the caliber and quality of fishing that you can have in the boundary waters, but without the price tag. You just have to work to get there. So just think of it that way. You got to work to get over the portages. You got to work to bring all your gear with you, but man, is it worth it for those amazing fishing opportunities. So with that, we got about 15 minutes left. I want to take any questions that you have and leave you with this. Someone asked me once upon a time, if you could only eat one meal for your last meal, what would it be? Like if you're on death row? Fried walleye on an open campfire grate with the loons calling in the distance. That's the last meal that I want to eat. That reminds me of those excellent times that I've had in the boundary waters.
Scott, what a fantastic job. As always, every time I listen to one of your webinars, I learn something new and add to my little list of birthday and Christmas gifts to give out to the kids so I can get some cool new stuff. So appreciate all your knowledge on that. We got a few questions coming in. If anybody does have any other questions, please enter those in the Q&A. And also in the chat function, I did put a bunch of links in there for permits, Lake Finder, Rec Compass, and those books Scott was mentioning earlier. So please visit that. Our friend Julia is chiming in. She's heading up to the boundary waters in late June and chasing smallies. They've heard multiple takes, so I'm wondering if water temperature won't be the primary point of intel. Would love to get the crew on some exciting topwater catches, but catching is the focus. Any tips?
Yeah, I think she's on the right track. Water temperature does make a big difference come June. We do get highly variable summers and springs, right? It's part of our climate change that we're seeing, and that's particularly profound in that boreal zone of Minnesota and including up in the boundary waters. There's years I go in and I have a temperature readout on my depth finder, and I'm shocked that it feels like bath water. I mean, on some of my early season trips, I've been able to go and swim, and I don't expect to do that on deep oligotrophic lakes. Then there's other years that we have a late ice off and things stay cold. So I would wholeheartedly agree that yes, your water temperature is really going to make a big difference. If it is warm by the end of June, they might be starting to transition, and that is kind of on that cutting point where we, thank you, Julia, where we are cutting between that early and midsummer period. And so certainly, put your time in a low light periods where those smallies are on the prowl, or I would definitely want to do the topwater thing just because it's so dang much fun. But the rest of the time, maybe start at mid depth and work your way deeper, trying to find, rock clusters and vegetation and anything else that's going to help you put the pattern together. But I would pay attention to those water temperatures and use it to sort of start where my hunt is going to be. If they're on the warm side, say, low mid 60s probably by that time. Maybe, well, it depends where. If you're in a bay, I'd even struggle to put a number on it because I could be way off the mark. But start at mid depths and work your way out, but don't be afraid to go shallow at low light hours.
Great. Paul was wondering if there are any barbless hook requirements or bans on treble hooks in the BWCAW or the Quetico.
In Quetico, there is. You have to be barbless. That's a great point. For the focus of this talk, we were talking about the American Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness. You don't need to have barbless hooks there, but when you travel into Quetico, you do need to. So, most folks say bring a hook file along. We don't expect you to go in and swap out every single hook that you're bringing in there. Speaking like I'm a Canadian, right? But if they don't expect you to do that, but they do know, show up, with lures that you file down the hooks on, or bring the file with you. Make sure that you have the barbs off your hooks when fishing in Quetico Provincial Park. It's not required on the boundary water side. I did mention too, no organic baits in Quetico, but on the boundary water side, you can bring bait into where you're fishing.
It's a good point. Have a plan for where you're going to go and where you want to fish. So bring the appropriate gear. So.
And it will ask you if you're planning to enter Canada as part of your permit for the boundary waters. So make sure you're answering that question and planning accordingly. You would, if you are going to go into Quetico, you need to stop at a wilderness ranger station. You can check out the details on their website for where you need to check in and get permits.
Great tip. Peter is wondering if it's okay to track fish with a flashlight.
Yeah, it's just a way of locating fish, whether we're talking about polarized sunglasses during the daytime, or it really is only going to be the only species that I see having. So they're talking about Tapodon lucidium. It's a membrane inside the fish's eye, and it's only present in certain fish species. So I see rock bass, where I see the light reflect back at me, and which aren't particularly popular, but they're with anglers, but there are some in the boundary waters. And then we see the reflection with walleye, and that's where it's a good technique for locating walleyes, just to be able to see if they're present in an area. Sometimes they'll be annoyed if you're casting too much water or too much light into the water, but it gives you an idea if they're there, and then all of a sudden you flip a bait over to them, and more often than not, if you put something in their vicinity, you have a chance to catch some walleyes that way. So there have been times when the fishing's been tough enough that we go nocturnal and we do our walleye fishing at night. And yeah, you can use a flashlight to track them, or a headlamp, just to see, hey, where are the fish? Are they up shallow? Can I find them on a rocky point or moving about someplace? You can see them, and that's the fun part, being right in camp. Turn that headlamp in and look down in the water. You'd be shocked how many times you can catch walleyes right in camp in many places. It's always worth throwing a line out while you're sitting in camp.
Yeah, definitely. This question leads right into Phil's question coming in next, and I don't want you to give away all your hot spots here, but save a couple for me after the recording. But Phil wants to know, if you had to pick 3 lakes to complete the BWCA Grand Slam, which ones would you pick and why?
Probably for permit.
So many to choose from.
Yeah, probably from permit availability, I'm partial to Saginaw because it is an entry point. It's very large, has lots of campsites, and all 4 species are right there. If you want a BWCA Slam, that's a great way to go. 3 lakes, if you went down to Seagull, and again, I'm suggesting the east side and off the Gunflint Trail, just because you have more lake trout water that's over there, and that's tied into that slam of those 4 species. And the limiting factor tends to be, where are you finding lake trout lakes? And so Seagull is a good choice, Saginaw is a good choice, Knife is a good choice. Knife, you get a lot of folks Knife and South Arm that come from either the Ely side or the Grand Marais side. If you're looking for a slam, those are some good places to focus your time.
Great. Doug was asking, brought up a good point here. Please discuss what are some good ways to prevent the spread of aquatic invasive species when canoeing or portaging between lakes.
It's as simple as what I was saying earlier. If you're dropping out the water from your bait, there are portions of the boundary waters that do have spiny water flea. I'd defer to what the invasive or the infested waters list has, or what some of those area offices have the intel on for which waters are infested. But a good best management practice is just to dump water. And yeah, that means I wouldn't move, water over a portage. It's just kind of a no-no. And yeah, I understand, if you're putting the water in there and you caught your minnows in one location, but just if you're looking for best management practices, just dump your water. It's not going to cause you any issues with your leeches. And on the minnow side, just go find some bait on the other side with the seine, or try to use artificials.
Great tips. Next one, what's a basic, well, this is getting an itinerary. So I put a link in the chat, or I can put a link in the chat for bwca.com. I think they have a lot of itineraries on there, but what's a basic itinerary for a person that is brand new to the BWCA if they were to plan a trip later this spring? Are there any areas that are hikeable with some shore fishing for 2 or 3 days and then come back for a canoe trip later?
So great question. One of the things that you'll do when you when you are signing up and you'd secure a permit from the Forest Service for entering the boundary waters, they require you to watch a series of 3 videos. And they talk about this in one of the videos with trip planning ahead of time, which is knowing the limitations and capabilities of the party with which you are traveling. So if you're brand new to all this, you probably want to go light. You don't know how quickly you can travel. You don't know what weather conditions you might encounter on a very first trip. Just doing something, that's manageable for you, finding somewhere that's easy to get into and get out of, that doesn't require a lot of travel. Um, that's more, if you're looking for a recommendation, that's where the expertise lies with the Forest Service park rangers, Superior National Forest Park rangers, with Boundary Waters folks, just being able to give them a call and say, well, here's my group. Do you have some suggested entry points? They know it more extensively than what I do, and they're more well suited for that. For the purposes of this talk, we're mainly focused on fishing, and with it being fishing centric, it's largely, hey, go into a place, move slowly or base camp and, make the most of your time fishing. But if you want a good itinerary, and I get it, fishing's still going to be a part of what you're doing. Maybe lakes that you plan for, no more than 3-4 miles of travel, for example, and that has a lot of available campsites, and maybe you want to base camp on the first trip so you're not having to move a whole lot. But just learn your limits and kind of go from there.
Great. It brings me up to, we did a trip planning BWCA talk. I think it was 138. Just trying to Google it real quick. I'll put a link to that in the chat too. So if you want to visit that, you can have some great tips on just getting started there too. So Julie had another question. We're almost out of time here. Anyone catch crayfish as bait? I haven't yet, but I'm curious. I know per regs, you have to use them in the same body of water as you catch them.
That's correct. And yeah, there are the foldable mesh style traps. If you are able to, they fold up like an accordion, and you can bring those along. They portage easily. They're lightweight. You could catch crayfish that way, like she rightfully points out. You want to keep them within the water body that you caught them in. And the only, sometimes if you catch a fish and you got the guts, you follow the rules for where you're properly burying them off-site and away from camp. But you could keep some of those guts, stuff it inside there. That's great bait to bring the crayfish in. However, I've been burned on that when a snapping turtle decided to, tear it apart and go through and set all my crayfish free. But you can do that. That is one way to execute on having crayfish as live bait for the water that you're fishing within.
Great. That snapping turtle question came up here too. Peter was wondering if snapping turtles have ever been a problem with the stringer. And
when you're on the move and active and you're cutting them, just to eat that night, it's really not an issue. But yeah, I've run into snapping turtles that have been messing with them when we're, cutting them up in camp, and they do become habituated. It's just like, wanting to take care of your fish or your bait or your garbage. You don't want to attract bears. It's the same thing in the aquatic realm. You got to watch out. Some of these snapping turtles can get habituated to campsites. So try not to keep them out there, or you run the risk of losing them. And just, catch as you go. That's the beauty, is you have a mission every day. Go catch dinner.
great. And we're just about out of time. So Tara had one last comment in here, wondering if you take it right along so you can teach these skills firsthand. So if you take early retirement, Scott, you have a business as a guide, it sounds like. So.
And there are folks that do lead fishing trips or general wilderness exploration trips. So guides are available, outfitters are out there. Take advantage of those resources, and just above all, enjoy your time in this beautiful public land that we call home in Minnesota, the Boundary Waters Canoe area.
It's definitely a very special place. We're from Minnesota and we can get access there, but there's people that come from all over the country, all over the world to check out the Boundary Waters. It's such a special place. So thank you again for sharing your knowledge and passion on fishing with us today. Really appreciate it. Everybody join us next week. We're going to talk about creating accessible outdoors. I don't know if everybody knows the Minnesota DNR got a kind of a historic funding thing called Get Out More funding to help improve fisheries and hatcheries and access points and all that stuff. So we're going to talk a little bit about that next week and learn what we're spending the money on and all the great stuff we're doing across the state. So hope everybody gets outside, has a safe and enjoyable rest of your week. It looks like it's going to be a nice warm one. So the water will be opening up. Get outside, have fun, and stay safe. We'll talk to you next week.